Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Children's Services and Education Scrutiny Board, which is being live streamed. My name is Councillor Liam Priest and I'm the chair for this meeting. Can I ask all attendees to mute their microphones, please, unless they have been invited to speak? If anyone wishes to speak, please use the raised hand feature or send a message using the chat feature and I will invite you to turn on your microphone at the appropriate point. When you are finished speaking, please remember to turn your microphone off again. Firstly, can I ask all members of the board present to please introduce themselves in turn? I'll just go through the list as it's displayed on my computer here. If I do miss you out, then shout at the end. I do have a habit of doing that. My apologies. So first, Councillor Shackleton.
Good evening, I'm here.
Thank you, Councillor Shackleton. Councillor Costigan.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Costigan, I'm part of the panel and I'm Wednesday North Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Costigan. Councillor Chidley.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, I'm Councillor Chidley for Prince's End Board and I'm on this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chidley. Councillor Millar.
Hi, I'm Kay Miller. I'm councillor for Gately Heath. I'm obviously on the scrutiny panel.
Thank you, Councillor Millar. Councillor Carmichael.
Oh, yes, Councillor Kerry Carmichael for Blackheath. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carmichael. Councillor Ashman.
Hello everybody, I'm Lorraine Ashman, I'm councillor for Tywydale Ward and a member of the panel.
Thank you, Councillor Ashman. Councillor Hussain.
Hi, Zahir Hussain, councillor of the Southern Victoria Ward and a member of this scrutiny board. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hussain. I do also have on my list here the Cabinet member, Councillor Underhill. Councillor Underhill, do you want to introduce yourself?
Right, thank you. Councillor Joyce Underhill, Cabinet Member for Best Start in Life.
Thank you, Councillor Underhill. Sorry, I muted myself and then carried on speaking. Excuse me while I just bring up the document in front of me. Okay, just before we start the business of the meeting, I have consulted with Democratic Services this afternoon about adding an agenda item onto this evening's meeting in between the elective home education working group update and the date of the next meeting, and that agenda item is just an update on the outcomes from the joint Children's Services and Education Scrutiny Board and the Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Board meeting we held a couple of weeks ago, I think. And it's just to refresh members' memories or to brief members who didn't attend that joint meeting or couldn't attend for the full session of the outcomes that relate to this board from that meeting and the decisions in terms of that I'll be making around slotting reports and agenda items into future meetings of the board. So we'll start with item number 1, apologies. I have Councillor Phillips's apologies. Are there any other apologies from the floor? I think we have a full house apart from Councillor Phillips. No, okay. Item number 2, members to declare any interesting matters to be discussed at the meeting or the existence and nature of any political party whip. There is no political party whip as far as I'm aware. Do any members have any interests they'd like to declare? No, nobody's hand has gone up. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of September 2020. Members, I'm sure you've had a chance to review those minutes in the agenda pack. Can I have a proposer that they are correct for record?
Move it, Chair.
Thank you. Is that seconded?
I can second it. Councillor Shackleton.
Yep, lovely. Okay. Anyone against that? No. Lovely. Those minutes are approved. Agenda item 4, reset and recovery update. We have a presentation from Leslie. So Leslie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councillor Priest. I'm going to just attempt to share my screen.
Okay.
I say attempt because it wasn't working earlier, but hopefully it will be now.
Or just while you're getting that on your screen. Yeah, no, it's coming up. I can see your profile. There we go. It's up now. Can I just, I've just had a message from Councillor McVitie. He's arrived a little bit late, but Councillor McVitie, would you mind just introducing yourself, please?
Hi there, apologies for being late. I'm Councillor McVitie and Councillor for the Newton ward. Apologies.
No problem. Thanks very much, Richard. Leslie, back to you.
Great, thank you. When we met in September, I presented a range of the reset and recovery activities that have been taking place across children's services, and outlined a lot of the work we've been doing through the reset and recovery activity as well corporately as it related to children's services. So I'm just going to bring you up to date from September to now, Chair, rather than going over all of that same ground. So just as an overview, so all of our services have been really busy since the start of term, as you can imagine. Many of our services which directly provide support to schools and to children in schools are back in schools. They're back in schools working with children, and they're supporting schools in their daily business in terms of the education of children, as well as all of the additional functions and activities that have had to be put in place as a result of COVID. And that includes things like making sure as well in the back office, making sure in the back office that we're responding to all of those needs as they come up each day. So for example, as bubbles of children might be self-isolating, the transport needs for those children might change on a daily basis. So a lot of work to be done to manage all of the things that are required to support schools. Quite a lot of our staff have been volunteering to assist other sorts of response functions as well. So in September, I made reference to a new team that we'd set up to support schools from 7:15 in the morning, where they might need support and help in making decisions about potential self-isolation decisions, or in some cases school closures. So staff have been volunteering for that, and also a range of other things across the council. Our levels of absence have been really low. Staff are working incredibly hard, but actually have been pitching up for work all of the time, and including staff who are self-isolating, who generally have been continuing to work. So we're working really hard just to make sure that those staff are also looking after themselves. But I wanted to just flag up really the commitment of our workforce has been absolutely amazing during this period of time. But obviously I want to encourage them to look after themselves as well as all of the other things that they're doing. But our business as usual is more or less on track, and that includes, for example, new schools that we're building, which are meeting the deadlines for their plans. And in some cases actually have managed to get ahead of some of those plans. So the business as usual is all in place. The levels of scrutiny and contact from the Department for Education and from Ofsted continues 2 or 3 times weekly. And Ofsted have also been visiting schools and undertaking sort of one-day visits, really assurance visits. I think we had 8 schools in the first half term. We've probably had about 11 schools so far that have had those visits. The assurance visit that I mentioned last time around children's services has been paused until after Christmas. So we think that in January that process will start again. So it's paused while we're during the second lockdown. We have seen referrals starting to increase now, increasing in children's social care, but also referrals into assessments for children, particularly young children, where there might be developmental delay or where they might need an assessment for a special educational needs or disability education, health and care plan. And we have seen some delays to those assessments because we haven't been able to have the contact with children that's required. Back to the reset and recovery impact work that we talked about at some great length at the last meeting. I've listed here just some of the impact statements that are related particularly to children and young people. So a disruption in formal education, home learning in strained environments, particularly children who may be in really limited conditions at home in terms of space. Obviously, an impact on exams and qualifications for young people, and lots of young people saying they're worried about what that means for their future. We see an impact on jobs availability for young people, and particularly training for young people, and a real impact on young people who may have been undertaking young apprenticeships who haven't necessarily been able to complete some of those apprenticeships because they haven't been able to do the placements that are required. Young people have talked to us about a lack of safe space and trusted support available to them that normally they would have got perhaps in school or in their youth club, etc. And they've talked about loneliness and isolation, and again, fears about what the future might look like, fears about their families. We've also seen a range of online pressure and increased risk. We have actually, through the Safeguarding Partnership, just agreed to use some resource on rolling out some additional training for parents and also for school staff around safety, online safety. But clearly there's a risk of harmful behaviours as a result of that, but also to do with loneliness and isolation and young people self-harming. Lots of services for those families have been disrupted, and the psychological support that maybe have been made available to them previously hasn't been made available, and some really challenging family relationships, particularly exacerbated by the increase in domestic abuse. And whilst we've seen overall lower referrals, there's been an increase in domestic abuse referrals. There's been identified low personal risk directly from COVID in terms of health and well-being, but a high long-term social and economic exposure to risk that's been identified. And linked to that economic exposure, we've seen a big increase in the eligibility of children for free school meals. That's risen, by 17.5% just since children have been back at school, and it's now 29% of pupils that are eligible for free school meals. So just looking at a couple of particular areas, schools in early years to start with. Our schools are just wonderful. Their planning, their resilience, the way they've engaged with us and with our public health colleagues as well has been fantastic, and we've had good feedback from schools as well about the support that we've provided to them, and from our early years providers. Generally, all of our schools are open. We have had a few short-term closures from some schools where generally it's not been safe to open the school because there haven't been enough adults to staff the building. Most of our schools now have experienced the need for pupils and or staff to self-isolate, and we've supported them in making those decisions through the telephone line. There's a word missing there, sorry, the support line, and the daily incident management team meetings that take place to help schools to make that decision about what they should be doing. Schools have been great in terms of making sure that remote learning is available, the catch-up activities and the tutoring that's been made available. It has been tricky actually with the DFE because the amount of devices that should have been available to schools that were originally confirmed have been reduced quite significantly, and that has meant that in a number of cases schools haven't had the number of devices that they've needed for all children to be able to do remote learning through IT. We're pursuing that all of the time with the DFE. We talked a lot at the last meeting about pupil wellbeing and how we're supporting that through PSHE and the curriculum, the new curriculum. But last week we also launched some new tools that schools could use to support staff wellbeing. As I said, at the beginning of this slide, schools have worked really hard, that they're doing a fantastic job, and school staff are under a lot of pressure. And again, we want those staff to be able to look after themselves as well as the children that they're looking after on a daily basis. So we've launched a new range of tools to help them with that. Attendance generally has been good in schools. We always have to see the context of this. Sometimes the attendance data looks lower, and that can create a little bit of a panic, but actually you only need one school maybe to have to close for a few days, and that impacts the attendance figures for the whole borough. So we have to see the context of this, and attendance generally has been good across the borough. We have seen a significant increase in elective home education requests, and we've got an item about that on tonight's meeting. There's still some unknowns around the future for examinations, testing and pupil assessment. The Welsh Government obviously has made some decisions, but that's yet to happen here, and schools and pupils alike and parents are getting a bit anxious about that now. We've also seen quite significant increases in costs for schools. And we've presented some examples to the DFE about these increased costs, whether that's in agency supply or whether actually that's practical things like, the increase in the heating cost when you're keeping your windows open to make sure that the classroom is ventilated. So we're hoping that that might be recognised by government, and there might be some additional resources to help schools. In terms of vulnerable children, the Vulnerable Children's Group that I talked about at our last meeting continues to meet weekly, and to make sure that across the partnership of agencies, we're really making sure that all of those children are being checked on in terms of their welfare, their support, and making sure that they can thrive. The new guidance that was published relating to clinically extremely vulnerable children has caused some confusion, and the DFE guidance, the public health guidance, and some other recent guidance that's come out from the NHS actually contradicts. And so our guidance to schools has been that if parents want some confirmation about whether or not their children are clinically extremely vulnerable and whether or not they should be at school, they need to check that out with their GP so they're absolutely certain. Our detached youth work has continued across this period of time, and it will continue right the way through the winter, through our streets, through our parks. It's been a great way to have conversations with young people about a whole range of things, particularly how to keep themselves and others safe, but also to address some of those feelings of isolation and build their resilience. I've already mentioned remote home education, but part of that is for self-isolating young people, but part of that is particularly to make sure that vulnerable children are provided with laptops and dongles so that they can work from home, and those permissions come through the council, and then we place the orders, and then in turn those devices are passed on to school to enable children to have those devices. We continue to provide data about vulnerable children. We're just about this week, I think, to complete wave 14 of that data. The reports from waves 1 to 13 have actually provided us with the things that we would have expected. Many of those things that I just read out on the slide about impact are things that are coming through from the information about vulnerable children, the surveys, and also that trend around referrals into children's social care decreasing, but now starting to increase again. The work through the Children's Safeguarding Partnership around surge planning, sharing business plans, and again making sure that all services are in place for children has continued. Partners are working really well together. And some of those areas that have been identified where there needed to be some additional services put in place, particularly around domestic abuse, for example, the Strategic Commissioning Partnership has managed to put those services in place. Through our corporate parenting board, we've continued to meet with young people. We've continued to meet as a partnership, specifically look at some of the impact of COVID, but actually try to get back to business as usual as much as possible, and to make sure that the education, health and care of our children in care and care leavers is really at the forefront of our minds. And our annual report, corporate parenting report, will come through Cabinet very shortly. And the most recent announcement impacting vulnerable children is around the new winter grant arrangements and free school meals during school holidays. We attended a meeting last Thursday about this, and it's clear that the winter grant arrangements are not the same as the free school meals during school holidays scheme. And we're waiting for the guidance now to make sure that we can put the right processes and procedures in place to support vulnerable children and families during the winter period through the winter grant arrangements. And the guidance for that is due to be published on the 26th of this month. So we've got to turn that around quite quickly because we've got to start that scheme as go live on the 1st of December. Some of the other activity taking place during this period of time has been around Brexit planning. So just a list here of some of the work we've been doing, again with our partners, with schools, with children's social care and with our own internal services to make sure that all the right things are in place around school admissions, around arrangements for teachers with qualified teacher status, around the supply of food into schools, where that might be coming from Europe, similarly with medicines in schools for children, where the protocols and arrangements around planning school trips to the EU are all being put in place. And in a way, it would be easy to take our eye off this ball at the moment because no one's really going anywhere, but we've got to be prepared for this as soon as we're able to start travelling again. Similarly, with data protection and data sharing arrangements, where staff from the EU are being employed in children's services organisations, including our own, where we're working with families who might be part of the EU settlement scheme and making sure that all of those arrangements are concluded before we get to 31st of December. Similarly, the status of children that are in our care and care leavers, where they might not have a right to remain in place. And where we have sometimes some complex cross-border arrangements in place for child protection, making sure that they're all finalised before the end of the year. We do have a Brexit working group across the council and a range of risks on the risk register that we're really paying great attention to now more than ever as we get into the last few weeks of finalising some of these arrangements. And then very finally, Chair, something about communication and information. So we continue to have a daily SITREP meeting, either with council directors or sometimes with council and our wider partners in a more strategic incident management team arrangement, so that we're sharing information while sharing our planning and ready to respond collectively as we can. We continue to have the weekly reset and recovery board meetings, and in terms of use of our buildings in particular, but also other activities that might need risk assessment, we continue to take our planning through reset and recovery board for approval, and we continue to have the weekly vulnerable people cell meetings, although sometimes we have 3 or 4 of those meetings each week, and I chair those meetings. We continue to meet with our partners in a range of other forums as well, with our schools, with education partners, the college, wider forums, and as I've mentioned, through the safeguarding partnerships. There's a lot of activity around keeping connected and having good communication in place. I've already mentioned DFE and Ofsted. Sitting around our local meetings are a range of regional meetings and national meetings with the Department for Education and MHCLG, but also with the Department of Health and Social Care, trying to join up some of this work in terms of the impact on children. We continue to work with children, young people and families to hear their voices so that we get a really good understanding of what life is like at the moment, and we can respond appropriately so that we really get a good understanding in terms of our own planning to respond to children and young people's needs. And obviously we have our own staff meetings and other support, but I've included there including staff conferences, because just in the last few weeks we've started to have some staff conferences as well, and they've been a really great way for people to connect with each other, to share some good practice, and to really buoy each other up and give some energy back to each other, because as I say, it has been a really challenging time for everyone. Okay, I'll leave it there for the moment, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie, for that. Just before I open it up to members' questions, I will just very quickly ask a couple of my own. First of all, I'm going to go through a list, Leslie, and then it's not that big, I promise. Thank you. First of all, you mentioned that the number of devices has been reduced, and I wondered, have the DfE given you a reason as to why they've reduced the number of devices? I would have assumed they would have made an assessment originally of how many devices we might have needed, and I wonder if they have downgraded that number, and perhaps want to know why they may have done that, if that is the case. Secondly, you mentioned some tools that you've introduced for staff wellbeing in schools. Could you just expand on a little bit more detail as to what those tools are? And we know the board has been briefed through its joint session, and I think through the last meeting, if I remember correctly, or a meeting around the tools available for council staff. And I wondered if they were similar or different in some way. You mentioned that the cost pressures on schools increasing. Do we know by how much? Do we have a forecast by how much those cost pressures have increased? And if what kind of response you're getting from the DfE, if there's a kind of political will within the government to perhaps meet those costs at some point down the line. And lastly, non-COVID related, the Brexit work that you mentioned, the working group that has been set up, is there a chance that we could have the risk register circulated to the board? Just I'm conscious that board members may want to gain some assurance on the mitigation of those risks, and we don't have another meeting until post-transition period anyway in January. So those are my 4 questions. If you'd like, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to those before I ask if other members have any other questions. Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, in terms of the devices and why there's been a reduced number, there are 2 conflicting bits of response really. One is that the DfE themselves have found it quite difficult to source all of the devices they need, but also they've done some reassessment of what they think local need is. We have challenged this quite strongly, and I'd be quite happy to share with you the response from the DfE and our challenge to them. We've had one example where a school bubble has needed to self-isolate, and the DfE have said that the allocation to that school is 1 device. Now clearly that can't be right. So I do think there are some real issues around this. But as I say, we're continuing to challenge. But I'm quite happy, Chair, to send you the response from the DfE. And you might want to have a conversation about that outside of the meeting with me, in terms of anything else that we might do to influence the DfE to release some additional devices to us. In terms of the support to school staff, yeah, so we've been first of all giving them some general messages about supporting each other, finding time to talk, making sure that you can identify when you're just tired or when you might be feeling burned out. So how to recognise the pressure, how to manage what might be ordinary daily pressure and COVID pressure, so a whole range of tools around that, and the charter mark that we've introduced with schools, which is there mainly to help children, but actually is very useful for staff as well. We've encouraged them to have a look at that. And then we've worked through, in terms of identifying when you might need some support, where you can go to seek local support, what the tailored support might look like, either for your whole school staff or for individuals, and also information about where to look for crisis support. So we've got a whole load of network signposting information for staff around that. We've given them some information around the Wellbeing Return Project, and some of that trauma training information to encourage staff to understand how to spot the signs. We've also provided a whole range of other blended learning as a whole programme that schools can dip into according to their availability of time. There's a Healthy Minds for Teachers programme, and that has a range of packages in it, looking at depression, stress, anxiety, and a whole range of programmes that can support that. So they're Zoom delivered. And then some additional support more formally through sort of wellbeing mental health organisations across the Black Country, where staff can also go to remain emotionally well and thrive during this period. So a whole range of resources there, Chair. How much is it costing schools? Well, we've had a few examples from schools. It's difficult, I think, at the moment to know what the extent of the pressure might be. Again, quite happy to make that information available to the Scrutiny Board, because we have sent those examples to the DfE as an example of the sorts of costs. Now, obviously, then if you use those 4 or 5 examples across our 120 schools, then those costs will be quite significant. But again, happy to share that information, Chair, if that would be useful. And the risk register, yes, I can share that as well. So you can see the content of the Brexit risk register and all of the actions against it. And so happy to share that as well, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Leslie. Sorry for firing so many questions at you. I think, yes, we would like the response from the DfE on the devices that they're supplying or not to Sandwell, and the response on the representation you made to the DfE on the funding pressures as well. I think that would be helpful for members to have a look at, and yes, the risk register. That can be, if that can be circulated, I think that would be helpful. Members, if you when we receive that risk register, obviously if you have any questions, send them directly to Leslie. Okay, we will go to the floor to see who's got their hand up to ask a question now. I've got 3 members so far. I'll go for Councillor Shackleton first, please.
First of all, can I thank Leslie for that very comprehensive update on the situation. And it's so good to know that so many people are involved in ensuring that as best people can, we can ensure the continuity of provision for our children, schools, families, everyone concerned. Just today I've heard of a school quite local to me that's had to close. A couple of questions around it. Number one, who actually makes the decision, or is it a combined effort? You know, Chair of Governors, Head, Lisa McNally, Public Health, etc. And also, are we short of supply agency staff for schools at the moment? Or perhaps these staff are frightened of coming into schools where there could possibly be some problems. I'm just really inquiring because I'd like to see things being kept open if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shackleton. The way that a decision is made about closing a school is usually a jointly made collaborative decision. Ultimately, it is a school's decision, but we have a process whereby school can contact our advice and support line. They provide their information. There's a conversation with public health trained staff. And if there's a view that a school needs to close, then there must be an incident management team meeting that must involve a senior representative from the council's education services, as well as public health. And then we talk through in that meeting all of the mitigations, we look at the risk assessment, and then reach a joint conclusion about what needs to happen. And that's really important because we need to work together in making these difficult decisions, and having that forum through which to make sure that every avenue of questioning has been thought about, and also all of the mitigations that could be put in place are thought about and exhausted before a decision to close is made, is really important. And what I've seen in my experience of these conversations is that everyone really, but particularly schools, are doing everything they can to make sure their school can stay open. So I think that hopefully is reassuring. In terms of supply staff, I know there's a national issue. I've not been made aware of a significant issue locally around supply staff. Interestingly, for those schools that have had to close, one of the common features is more to do with support staff, premises officers, lunchtime supervisors, those staff without whom you can't safely open your school. And that's been one of the real challenges, because normally that's quite a small cohort of staff as well in any school, even in a big school. But without those people in place, it's often not possible to open for health and safety reasons. Where we have seen that very, less than a handful of schools that so far have had to close completely for a few days, they're soon up and running again because they've managed to put other things in place. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shackleton. Your hand is still raised on the icon bar, so if you just take that down if you're finished.
Yeah.
Thank you. Cheers. I'll keep going down the list in the order that they're presented to me on my computer here. Councillor Costigan next.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of comments from me, and thank you, Leslie. Good presentation as usual. Yeah, regarding the where it mentioned the attendance being good, I think that's just shows you that being good is obviously the children have missed school so much. I know my grandchildren did, so that's the first thing I wanted to mention. The second thing was the winter grant arrangements and free school meals for the vulnerable children. Could you actually keep us posted on that, because I am getting asked about that, so just appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to keep you in touch with the winter grant payments, and the clarity really is about how we identify the vulnerable families and vulnerable people. There's a different scheme or an additional scheme that's being put in place for families where there are children under 4 years of age. There's another additional scheme which supports food banks, and we're waiting for another announcement about free school meals. So we're just trying to find our way through all of these things at the moment. But yeah, as soon as I have more information, happily let you have that information.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Councillor Costigan. Thank you, Leslie. Councillor McVitie.
Thank you, Chair. Mine echoes Councillor Costigan's comments. We're not going to have another meeting as a scrutiny group until January, and obviously you've said the winter grant arrangements are going to change. I want to make sure Sandwell are going to be prepared, but also whether we're likely to see more families apply or whether the changes are likely to affect more of our Sandwell families, and just to make sure we have as much information going up to Christmas as possible. Thank you.
Chair, if it would be helpful, I can make sure that as we move along these sort of next phases over the next sort of 3 or 4 weeks, really, I can just send maybe some bullet point updates to the scrutiny board just to keep you in touch as we go along. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I think that'll be really helpful. I think from what Councillor Costigan and Councillor McVitie said, I think that's an appropriate thing to do. If you could circulate those to the whole board, that would be helpful. Councillor Ashman.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just want to ask a question about the online learning, Leslie. I just want to know, is it working? Are the children adapting? Are they struggling with it? And also, what's the actual process? Do they actually have to log on in a classroom environment so they're actually part of that class?
So different schools are doing things in different ways, and sometimes many different ways in one school, and sometimes the arrangements are different for primary schools and secondary schools depending on how old the children are. In primary, a lot of schools are also still issuing materials that aren't IT based, so workbooks and a whole range of things like that for children. When they log on, quite often they might be logging on as a whole class and seeing their teacher and being delivered with a lesson by their teacher and all being able to contribute in some way to that. In secondary, it's sometimes a bit more intensive than that, depending on the lesson and the subject matter. There are a lot of other online resources in the secondary space that that pupils can do on their own and in their own time. Obviously, that then needs the motivation to encourage them to do that. And I know schools are spending a lot of time staying in touch with pupils as well to encourage them to do that work. And schools have told me that they regularly or daily look at who's logged on, what they've done, and if they don't see young people logging on to do the work, then they're in contact with them to get them to do the work. So I think it's quite sophisticated in some cases, but I think it's quite nice as well that there's a balance of not everything being online. The remote learning is sometimes not IT based. It's sometimes more physically based as well. I think the area where older young people, secondary age pupils, perhaps are really missing out, though, are where those classroom activities are needed that you can't replicate at home. So science and things like that, really. But I know schools are working really hard when children are in school to get them to be able to complete those areas of work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ashman. Thank you, Leslie. I don't have any other. Oh, Councillor Ashman, your hand's gone back up. Do you have it? Oh, it's gone back down again. There we go. No problem. I don't see any other hands up from members. Does anyone have any other questions or comments before we move on to the next agenda item? No. Okay. I move that we've received the report and it's noted. In the absence of any dissenting voices, I'll assume that is accepted. Yep. No one's screaming at me saying that I've done something wrong, so that's good. So moving on to the next agenda item, we have agenda item 5, the Adoption at Heart Annual Report for 2019-20, and that's Leslie and Mark Tobin. Mark, do you just want to introduce yourself first of all before you start?
Yes, hello everybody, I'm Mark Tobin. I'm the Head of Service from Adoption at Heart, the Regional Adoption Agency. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Now, is it Leslie or you that's starting the
I think I'll just say hello to Mark, if that's okay, Chair, as a visitor to the Scrutiny Board. And just as a reminder, you have it in your covering paper, but adoption services are contracted separately via Adoption at Heart, and Mark does all of the work to make sure that Adoption Heart functions well. So I think Mark's got some slides that he's going to take you through.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. So if you want to present those, the floor is yours.
Yep. So let me know if you can see these, please.
Yep, I've got them.
Okay. Just put that on slideshow. Okay. So as Leslie mentioned, I've provided a report which is a combined full year report for last year, 2019-20, along with the 6-month performance summary for the current year. Normally those would be provided separately, but because of COVID-19, there wasn't a meeting to present the reports to separately, so we agreed with the board that we would provide a joint report on this occasion. So I'm not going to give you too much background because I think members are already aware of what the Regional Adoption Agency is. I know Leslie has covered this in her covering report as well. The service went live on the 1st of April last year. So we've now been a live, fully operating service for 18 months. The formation of the Regional Adoption Agency is part of a national government-led initiative to integrate local authority adoption services, and all local authorities were required to do that to join an integrated service by 2020. So a decision was made within this region and within Sandwell that they would join Adoption at Heart along with Wolverhampton, Walsall and Dudley. And I'm guessing that you're probably also aware that there's a strong history of those 4 local authorities collaborating and working closely together with regard to adoption services. So very quickly, by way of, and by the way, this presentation is just a baseline summary of the key points contained in the report that I've provided. I'm mindful there's a lot more detail in that report, and I'm happy to take questions on that afterwards. So by way of a service update, I've already mentioned how long we've been live. We've done a lot of work in the first 18 months in establishing the service, the identity of the service, in being clear across the partnership. We like to call ourselves a partnership, and we prefer to stay away from terminology with the staff that has the feel of a commissioning arrangement or a contractual arrangement, which I know in essence is what it is. However, in terms of how it feels in working and building relationships across the partnership, it's really helpful to think of us all as colleagues in a partnership working together. So that work around identity has not been done just within Adoption at Heart in terms of the 70 or so staff that work, in that service. It's been done across the partnership as a whole. Really good news is we have a very stable workforce. We've hardly lost any staff in terms of the social workers and other staff who tupied over at the beginning in April last year. By far the majority have stayed. I think it's single figures in terms of the numbers that decided not to stay. So that's really positive. We've made a lot of progress in having visual oversight of the children who we're working with, because obviously that's the key thing that we do, is that children coming through the care planning process come to us at a certain point in the process. If, very sadly, there isn't an option for those children to return to the care of birth parents or grow up within the network of their family and friends environment, then adoption is the last resort. It's always the last resort for all professionals and the courts as well. But when we start to do some planning with regard to those children at the appropriate point in care proceedings, then we need to know who they are. And in the early days, we did a lot of work in establishing that oversight and in terms of being able to track the progress of individual children. And we now have clear systems in place for that. You'll hear me talk in a moment more about this, but one of our greatest challenges is reaching people within the region and outside the region to become adopters for Adoption at Heart, to provide a home for the children from within our region who need adoptive families. And at the moment, it's fair to say we haven't got enough of those families. We haven't got enough people coming forward. So there's a lot of work going on around that, and I'm going to update you on that in a moment. We've also done a lot of work around our adoption support offer, because the other thing we do as a service is we have the statutory responsibility to support any adoptive family who needs support within the region. And we've done a lot of work in ensuring that we're good at targeting those resources to the families that are most in need of those interventions within assessments of need. We're also part of a national RAA network, and I just wanted to briefly just sort of highlight the fact that we're not doing this in isolation. The Regional Adoption Agency initiative is all about driving innovation and practice improvements and working nationally with other RAAs. There are 31 of them altogether now across England, and we work very closely together in doing that piece of work, sharing practice and innovative developments. Final point, and this is very similar to what Leslie's been saying about staff within Sandwell. We've had to adapt our service delivery to virtual working systems. Staff are employed within Wolverhampton. There was a huge piece of work in late March and April to adapt our ways of working into virtual systems, and that's been done very successfully. We've become very used to working in that way now, and we will no doubt retain a lot of the benefits of working in that way as we move forward and as things improve, as we move beyond COVID-19, whenever that is. The other thing I'm pleased to report is that, just like Leslie said in regard to Sandwell, our staff sickness and absence rates are very, very low. We've hardly had anybody off sick with the virus, 1 or 2 people actually. We have had a lot of people affected by it in other ways, as I'm sure is quite common, but we're in a good place in terms of resources, staffing wise. I'm going to move on to summarise some of the performance in relation to children that's contained in the report without going into all of the detail, key headlines. And it's a positive picture really for Sandwell. I wanted to highlight the fact that since the service went live, we've placed 62 children in the 18-month period. And that's 62 Sandwell children in the 18-month period, 162 in total for the partnership. So Sandwell, as a result of being in the Adoption at Heart service, has seen a 20% increase in children who were waiting for adoptive placements. And the 20% is based on the first year's performance, because that's the first full year's performance we have. So that's a positive development. Numbers of children waiting from within Sandwell were greater than within the other 3 local authorities. So we had a dynamic in the partnership in the first year in particular where more children were waiting within Sandwell, so that conversely had an impact on performance for the other 3 partners. And I'm really pleased to say, and I think Leslie highlighted this in her covering report, that dynamic has evened out as we move into the end of the first 6 months in the current year. So we're seeing a healthier balance in terms of performance across the partnership. Really good news is that we've seen increased usage of what we refer to as early permanence. It's also called foster for adopt. It's where somebody who goes on to adopt a child initially fosters that child with a view to adopting them, and that avoids delay for the child, and it enables the local authority to place the child in advance of receiving a legal order from the court to place. Huge benefits to children, small amount of risk in terms of the child not remaining in the placement. It is good practice, and I'm really pleased to report that we've done 20 of those placements, and 5 of those were Sandwell children, and those 5 are all in the first 6 months of this year. And a little point on that as well is that we are seeing delay in the court process, the local authority obtaining the legal order to place for adoption. And given that we've driven early permanence practice up, it is an opportunity for us to place some children to mitigate against that delay that we're seeing as a result of COVID-19. So we're in a good place to be using that regulation effectively in mitigating against that risk with the current delays in court. I wanted to highlight from the report that 2 figures really, that at the end of September, the end of Q2 this year, there were 23 children on a placement order waiting to be placed. But out of those 23 who we're working with for family finding purposes, only 11 were actually in active family finding because the other 12 were already in the process of being linked or matched, but not yet placed with adoptive parents. And that compares with 48 at the end of the last financial year, at the end of March. And at that point, 20 of those 48 were in active family finding. So that evidence is what I was saying to you earlier, that we're seeing this evening out in terms of children waiting within Sandwell. I need to highlight the fact that too many of our children currently, jumped again there, too many of our children are being placed interagency currently. So when we place children for adoption, they either get placed with an Adoption at Heart adopter who we've recruited ourselves, and if we haven't got an adoptive family for that child, then we have to purchase a placement from an external agency. And at the moment, we're sort of 50-50 on those two methods of placing. We want to place far more children within the region because there are huge benefits to those children and families in growing up within the region. And that remains a performance challenge for us as we try and improve our adopter sufficiency. And I just wanted to highlight that to you. I also will just highlight the fact that last year 31 children were adopted in year. And a large number of those will have been placed with adopters before Adoption at Heart went live, before Sandwell came into the regional partnership. And that compares with 13 to date this year. Two things to say on that nationally, numbers of children placed for adoption and adopted are dropping, and that's a national trend that we're seeing. And also that we're expecting to see significant delay this year in the numbers of children adopted as a result of the court delays in processing adoption orders to final hearing. So we're monitoring that very closely in the current year. That means that children placed for adoption will remain placed but not yet legally adopted for longer than would be ideal while the courts catch up with those applications. I also want to highlight timeliness because we're closely monitored on timeliness in working with children. And you may be aware already, and the detail of this is all in the report, and it's published nationally for each local authority on the DFE website. But there's two key indicators that local authorities are monitored on in terms of timeliness. A10 is the child's total journey from when they come into care to being placed with to moving in with their adoptive family. And the local authorities are monitored against a target of 426 days for that one. And Sandwell's single year performance on current for 2019 was 420, so within the threshold, and the 3-year average is also within the threshold. What isn't quite so good is that the A20 figure, which is the timescale from receiving the placement order to matching the child, the threshold, the target we're measured on that is 121 days or 4 months, and that's significantly above that threshold at 233 days. The 3-year average is also outside. So there is clearly further work for us to do within the partnership in improving that timescale from when the local authority has that placement order, and that means front loading plans for children so that we're profiling those children and linking them with adopters before, as much as we can, before the court order is in place. So just wanted to highlight those. So those are the key figures from the report around children. I'm going to quickly just summarise the key elements of adopter performance from within the report. For the first year the service operated, we approved 51 adopters, which was a mix of legacy adopters that came across to the service at the point where we went live because we inherited the adopters who were already in the process. And then some of those are new adopters that came into the process as well, directly to Adoption at Heart. So, and that there were significant transitional challenges that seem very historical now, because things have significantly moved on, with us becoming much more established now as a partnership. But in that first year, we did feel the impact of those transitional challenges. So I'm pleased to report that, and it's slow progress, but progress to date in this year looks encouraging, because we have approved 34 in the first 6 months. I need to highlight that there have been some challenges in progressing adopters in the first 6 months due to difficulties in getting medicals and some of the other checks that we're required to undertake, and COVID-19 has impacted on all of that. So we are actually quite pleased that we've managed to approve 34 in view of those challenges, and we're projecting cautiously towards doing between 60 and 70 this year, which will be a reasonable increase in performance. The context that I want to put that in is that we are likely to need to place around 130 children in total across the partnership this year, and ideally we shouldn't be placing more than 40% of those interagency. So clearly we're not going to meet that 40% target this year, but we need to be looking towards next year and beyond, approving between 80 and 100 adopters. That's the performance the service needs to reach, and we are making reasonable progress now towards that required level of performance. So yeah, service priority is reduced interagency usage. Another positive is we've seen a 31% increase in the numbers of adopters entering the registration of interest process. So that's the beginning of the assessment process within the journey of an adopter. So that's encouraging. We have seen an unusual or unexpected rise in adopter inquiries during COVID-19, and all adoption agencies have experienced that spike in inquiries, and we've yet to see whether that's a sustainable spike or whether that's as a result of people having more time during lockdown and beyond in thinking about whether they might want to adopt. I'm also aware that there are more challenges for people in relation to income and uncertainty about their employment, etc., in relation to the virus, so that could well have an impact in converting a lot of those inquiries into approved adopters. But the progress is looking positive. We're running a very clear regional marketing and communication strategy to increase brand awareness for Adoption at Heart, and we've got communications staff from all 4 local authorities, with Sandwell very actively involved, and Leslie has been in a very helpful leading role in driving this on behalf of the Strategic Commissioning Board recently, in getting that group of comms officers working more tightly together, because clearly Adoption at Heart, although many of the hosting functions are in Wolverhampton, it's not purely Wolverhampton that drives the marketing and communications. It's a responsibility of all 4 local authorities, and we're seeing some good progress on that. We're also currently part of a national recruitment campaign which is funded by the DFE called You Can Adopt, and there's a lot of advertising and promotional work going on around that currently, so I'm hoping you might have seen some of that. And the key message behind that campaign is one of encouraging people who wouldn't normally come forward because perhaps they think it's too difficult or that the odds would be stacked against them, in encouraging those people to come and talk to us, so that we start to reach some of the people who we haven't reached before within parts of the community that we haven't successfully reached. And in particular, there's a need for us to reach more effectively into Black and ethnic minority communities, because we have high numbers of those children in the system in need of adoptive parents, but not enough adopters coming through from within those parts of the community. So there is work to be done there. So that's my presentation over. I'm happy to take questions. I'll just try and take that off. Hold on.
Yes, thank you, Mark. That's very detailed and informative. Thank you. Just before I ask members if they have any questions, I do have one question, which is around
Sorry,
children who.
Sorry to interrupt. Has that gone now?
Yes, yeah,
That's
okay.
Gone. Thank you. Cheers.
Just around the numbers of the children who have been placed into adoption in the last year or so. I know usually you, unless I'm wrong on this, and please correct me if I am, you usually try to place children in an area that they know or that they're familiar with. I understand in some circumstances that isn't advisable, but the ambition is to try. How many of the children who've been placed into adoption have been locally placed, if you like? How many Sandwell children have stayed in Sandwell? Because I think in previous years there's been some concern that perhaps children have been placed into adoption in other boroughs, sometimes very far away, when it wasn't necessarily necessary for that to happen to them.
You want me to take that now, or are there other questions that you?
No,
want
you can take
to?
that.
Yeah.
Take that one
Okay.
now, and then I'll ask other members to come in.
All right. So I haven't got data with me to provide you with an exact figure on that, but I can get that to you via Leslie if you'd like me to. I'd have to ask the family finding team to give me that data. And I want to just say that you're absolutely right that a key objective of regionalising adoption is to place more children regionally. That's why we need to build our in-house pool of adopters so we do that more effectively. We also have a strategy whereby if we are going interagency, we go within the Midlands first. So we initially, as a first step, look at adoption agencies within the Midlands who are recruiting adopters from within the Midlands area. So although we may not have placed many of them, enough of them within the region that we're part of, Sandwell, Walsall, Dudley and Wolverhampton, a significant number of them have gone within the Midlands area still. And as you say, there are huge benefits to a child growing up within the regional that they relate to in terms of their identity, their birth identity, massive benefits for the future in terms of them tracing birth family, and also in terms of us receiving support. The adoptive families benefit hugely from being in the region that the child grew up in and the agency that placed them. So I will get some figures for you on that and come back to you.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions from members? I've got Councillor Hussain with his hand up. Councillor Hussain.
Hi.
I think you're on mute, Councillor Hussain.
I thought I took myself off. Thanks, Chair. Thank Mark for that. Thanks for that presentation. Just a few questions, please. So the increase in terms of children that are being put up for adoption, do you have any data what sits behind that, what the reasons are for those children being put forward? Also, do you have a breakdown of the backgrounds in terms of ethnicity, faith, backgrounds of these children, and also when they're being placed, similar to what the chair was saying in terms of areas? Do you have a breakdown on if they are actually placed with families that are from a similar background to the children themselves? And lastly, around the marketing work that you're doing in particular you mentioned around the BAME communities, what actually has been done? Because I mean it's been on our agenda for a significant period of time now that there's not enough families that are coming forward. So yeah, it's something that we really want to home into as a local authority. Thank you.
Okay. If I've misunderstood any parts of your question, just interrupt me as I answer. The first part I'm interpreting as, I think you're asking me why less children are being placed for adoption.
No, I'm asking because the way I read it was that there's more children that have been up for adoption now, and just wanted to understand what.
Sorry, I know what you mean.
Yeah,
sorry,
what
yeah.
the increase is now. What's the reason behind the increase? If you've got any data that are behind that.
Okay, so perhaps I didn't explain that very well. So what we saw was at the point where Adoption at Heart went live, there were quite significant numbers of children waiting on placement orders who hadn't been matched or placed with adoptive parents. So what I wasn't saying was that there's been a year-by-year increase in children coming through for adoption for Sandwell. We're seeing a drop in those numbers year by year, and that's consistent with what's happening regionally and nationally, because more children are going into other forms of permanence other than adoption. And you know that there are many positives about that as well. That's not necessarily something that we'd highlight as a problem, because we do of course want children to grow up within their birth families, and it may be that they've gone down the special guardianship route placed with a connected person. But what I was trying to explain in the presentation was that we had relatively high numbers of Sandwell children waiting in comparison to the other 3 local authorities. So I think that's probably what you've picked up from what I'm saying around the increase in the numbers. And I said in the presentation that you can see that the numbers waiting are now reducing. Compared to the 31st of March to the 30th of September, we're seeing an evening out of those figures. Is that okay for the first part? Yeah. So second part of your question about, I think it was about the ethnicity of the children, and I think you were asking me around who we've placed those children with and whether we've got any data. Again, I will get you some data on that. What I wanted to highlight was the fact that the regulations are very, very clear that if we haven't got an adoptive parent who is a full cultural match to the child, then the regulations require us not to create any delay in placing that child with a view to finding a full cultural match in terms of the placement. So we always try and find a culturally appropriate placement, but it's not the only requirement in determining the right match and the best possible adoptive family for that child. Those are the current regulations that we're working within. And you know, there is an interesting and lively debate going on that subject at the moment, actually. And because of the low numbers of adopters from certain parts of the Black and ethnic minority, Asian and ethnic minority communities waiting in the system for placements, if we did prioritise that factor, we'd then be introducing significant delay for many children.
And absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And these children obviously need to find homes as quick as possible and be in an environment that's going to be nourishing for them. It's just, I think it'll be a good tool to use with the communities when we're engaging and talking about we want to provide the best possible match for these children, and you know that will kind of hopefully be something that we can actually speak to our communities about.
Yeah, and we are using a lot of data. It's not our region specifically, it's wider data within the You Can Adopt campaign that's being driven nationally to drive that message. And it sort of links to your third question, actually, that there is a major element of that campaign is about reaching Black, Asian and minority ethnic people more effectively. And I'm part of a piece of work that's going on across the Midlands at the moment within that, where there's a pilot going on in terms of reaching into the Black and ethnic minority communities, mainly focused in Birmingham at the moment. We're piloting some particular techniques. We had to change it all because we were just about to launch it before COVID-19. We were going to be using street ambassadors to go into Black churches and community centres and other places on the street, really, to talk to people face to face. It was a huge piece of work being done in central London and central Birmingham. Because of the obvious consequences of COVID-19, that's been pulled back and it's now being done virtually in a slightly different way. But we're looking very closely at the results of that pilot. And it's being led by an organisation called Home for Good, who've done a lot of work in this area, particularly in with adoption services. And it's being driven by the DFE and from within central government. There's a huge drive in this area. I'm pleased to say I attended roundtable event at 10 Downing Street 2 weeks ago with some other adoption leaders, because current Children's Minister and Secretary of State have a particular interest in this area. So there's a lot happening in driving it. We're really hoping that we see more funding to help us to do this better and more innovative solutions to do it. So I will also come back to you with some data, because I'm hearing your question very clearly. Of the Sandwell children, the 62 Sandwell children that we've placed to date, we'll do some work on the data and look at ethnicity of adopters that we've placed with, and let you have that through, Leslie, as well. And that'll maybe help the discussion in future. And you're right, we can probably use that from a marketing point of view as well.
Mark, and if there's anything as councillors we can do to help in terms of engaging with communities and getting that word out there, more than happy to put you in touch with local organisations or be part of that.
Thank you very much. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. Thank you, Mark. Councillor McVitie.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, and it's maybe just my preference, but there's a lot of information in the table and a lot of information in the report. And one of the other organisations we speak to breaks down their annual report into months. And I just thought that actually might be able to show us as local councillors trends or information where either a campaign or seasonal information or some sort of change will actually provide more context to the information. So I was just wondering in future, if we have a report in the next 6 months, whether we can see annual figures but also broken down monthly with key performance indicators, average, national average, per month or whatever, so we actually can see and relate to some of those figures, and it provides context to know why the numbers are high, why the numbers are low, but it actually breaks it down and gives us more of information.
And are you meaning in relation to children placed? With
regards to the statistics in this report, it would be handy to see how that's broken down annually, because obviously you've done 18 months. I'd like to think we'll see in a report in 6 months' time, so we can relate the two against each other, and it just gives more context about how the organisations move forward over the last 6 months, how that's improved or got worse. But actually those figures might actually, if they're broken down into detail, actually show the numbers over the months actually aren't as bad as they relate to a final figure. And obviously you can then probably provide us with information about marketing, about seasonal change or whatever, pandemics, and I think that provides us with a bit more context about how difficult your job is, rather than actually showing us a high or a low number. It actually breaks it down and gives us more information to work with.
That's really helpful, because we're developing the template for that report and taking feedback on it. It's the second time I've submitted it, and Leslie will recall the first time I submitted it there was too much detail in it and I was asked to take quite a bit out this time. But I'm hearing what you're saying there, that something that gives you trends and whereby, particularly in relation to adopter recruitment, actually it might be helpful. You'll be able to see the impact of COVID-19 and beyond within the current year. So I'll take that away in terms of thinking about how we use the template next time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McVitie. Thank you, Mark. I don't see any other members' hands. Oh, Councillor Carmichael's just popped a hand up. Councillor Carmichael.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies if you've answered this, my sound keeps dropping out. I just want to know about disabled children, really, or children with disabilities, and how they are within the process, and also figures for those, like the BAME children, you know, disabilities and that.
So yeah, we have quite a number of children who have complex additional needs. Not all would be categorised as disabled, but we have a lot of children in the system waiting to be placed who have significant developmental delay and other significant health issues. And sadly, those children do tend to wait longer for adoptive placements, because it is a challenge in reaching adopters who will take those children. I haven't got data from within the 62 of Sandwells, but if you want me to factor that in alongside the breakdown of ethnicity, we've got a range of characteristics there that I'll pull together into a report and let you have through Leslie, because that sounds as though that will be helpful. I mean, One thing I just want to highlight on that subject is it's a challenge for adoption agencies where we've got children who are very complex and where we know they'll experience delays, because we would like to do a lot more much earlier on in profiling those children and searching for adopters, but the courts require us to wait until we've got some certainty around granting legal orders before we can do a lot of that work in terms of using any identifying characteristics. And I just wanted to highlight that because there is a debate going on about whether that is child-centred practice or not. And there is a particular issue within our region around that due to the views of a couple of judges who I've come across. And it's a healthy debate that we're having. And of course, we need to be respectful to the birth parents in those court proceedings. But frustrating for us when we see those children being delayed, because if a child has complex additional needs, we know that could take a long time, and the earlier we can start that process of finding an adopter, the better.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carmichael. Thank you again, Mark. I haven't got any other hands up from members. Are there any other questions or comments from members before we move on? No? Okay. Thank you for that, Mark.
Thank you. Is it okay if I leave your meeting at this point? I'll leave you to the rest of the meeting. Thanks very much.
Okay. I completely understand. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay. Back to the agenda then. So we have agenda item 6 now, which is the Elective Home Education Working Group Update Report. I understand that Sue and Ramsey have some slides or presentation to share with us. First of all, I do want to just check if we have a representative from the Department for Education here. I was expecting Jason Henderson, but I can't see him in the meeting at the moment.
No, Chair. We have sent a second link, but he hasn't been able to join the meeting this evening.
Right. Okay. Well, hopefully we can get him on a future meeting, because it'd be important, I think, to try and get his views from a central government point of view. I'll give a very brief overview of the work that we've done so far for members who are not part of that working group. So we met on the 9th of October, and we've been considering our scope for the review. The scoping document should have been included in the agenda pack for this evening for all members to review. And if any members have any questions or comments on that, then please do ask. We have considered a scene setting report that goes through the current state. I'll let Sue and Ramsey go into some of the detail around that, but the bottom line is we have seen an increase, a significant increase in elective home education, both before COVID. We saw that trend starting to go up, and during COVID it seems to have increased in its kind of velocity upwards, and I think part of the review will be around understanding why that is and how that is. Some of it we know already is specifically due to the pandemic, and other parts are for other reasons, and I think it will be interesting to see as hopefully with the news of the now 2 vaccines that seem to have a more than 90% effectiveness, as the COVID situation is resolved, and next year hopefully will be interesting to see if those children return to school or if they continue to be educated at home. So we have identified some areas of inquiry, some initial lines of inquiry, and that is around the regulation or lack thereof from central government in elective home education, which does hamper somewhat our data gathering as an organisation. In some parts of the EHE world we're flying a bit blind, and that is in large part down to the government not requiring home educators to provide information to the council, I think Sue's just responded in all caps lock, so I hope she's not shouting. Sorry.
Sorry, Chair. I started typing, it was too late for me to change. I do apologise.
Don't worry, it happens to the best of us. But I thought I'd just point that out. It was quite funny when it flashed up on my screen. You sounded quite angry.
No, sorry, no. I was too late to change.
No, it's okay. Don't worry. I've lost my train of thought now.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. So we're having a look at how home education may impact on the outcomes for a child, whether children in EHE perform better or worse or the same as their counterparts in school, and that was something that was picked up at the board meeting where we initially discussed undertaking this work. And also around the safeguarding aspects, particularly for those children who have never been registered in the school at all, and perhaps aren't other agencies perhaps don't have a watching brief on them either or know where they are. And again, I think that's where the lack of regulation ties into that. So those are the lines of inquiry that we've outlined initially. The working group at its last meeting did agree to add 2 other points to the scope, which is first of all a point that Councillor McVitie suggested, which is to consider what other local authorities do when communicating with parents who are choosing to electively home educate and their children, and also what more could the council do to not only support children to remain in school, because I think we don't want to approach this in the with the mindset of predetermining our conclusions on this at all. We want to see where the evidence gathering phase takes us, but also what the council can do more to support parents and children who are electively educated or who choose to electively educate at home. So now we're moving into that evidence gathering phase. So as I said, we received the scene setting report, and that was considered by members at the last working group meeting. Surveys have been distributed on the 2nd of November to parents and children who are home educated, and we'll consider the feedback from those surveys at our next meeting. Members of the board did have the opportunity to feed into the design of that. If you can hear my daughter shouting, I apologise. She's the other side of the door and she's screaming, "Let me in, Daddy, let me in." Surveys, they were distributed, and members had an opportunity to feed into the design of those, and I think officers did take on board members' comments, and when they sent them through to the service users, well, the parents and the children. In terms of, thank you, Richard. Her mommy's looking after her at the moment. So I've not left my child isolated on the landing or anything. Okay. We have a focus group with parents and children who have experience in electively home education, and the teachers that the council employ to liaise with parents who are electively home educating. That's next week on the 25th. I think that will be an important session for us as a working group. We've already discussed in our last meeting the importance of approaching that in a very impartial manner, because I think sometimes those who choose to electively home educate can feel that the authorities are standing in judgment or sitting in judgment against them, and that is something we absolutely want to avoid, giving that kind of impression when we're carrying out our work. So we will be led by the evidence and the feedback that they give us. And the next working group is on the 2nd of December. We did have some questions. I did have some brief questions for the DFE. Unfortunately, as Deb said, he couldn't get onto the meeting this evening. Hopefully we'll be able to rectify that for a future meeting. I did want to I'll read your message in 1 second, Leslie. I can see you've sent one. Deb did brief me earlier that she's discovered that the Education Select Committee, the Parliamentary Education Select Committee, is currently undertaking a review, or agreed to undertake a review back in September, but we couldn't see any further progress on that. So we'd like to ascertain exactly how far they've got with their review, and I'd like the evidence that we gather and the conclusions we come to in our review to feed into that. Process. Okay, let me just jump back into the meeting from the document I'm reading off of. Okay, so Jason, yes, is it the gentleman from the DFE is in the meeting now, but he's observing. So I understand if you can't speak back to me. So hello and welcome. If you are here and you can hear me. Right, Ramsey and Sue, do you want to? I think Sue, you're from your shouty message. You're going to be taking the briefing of members. The floor's yours. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much for that, Chair. I don't know how I can follow that up now. I've really set myself up, haven't I? And just to say, I think, Chair, that was a very good summary. And actually, you've probably stolen about half of our slides, but never mind. I think before I share the screen, I just really wanted to say that obviously since we were last at this group meeting in the summer, I think we've had two very, very productive working group meetings where there's a lot being discussed and a lot of things have started to be processed and to be actioned, and it's been a very positive process. I'm just going to disappear now because I'm just going to put my screen on the slides that we have for you today. If you can just bear with me.
No problem.
And hopefully, sorry, I
can see those.
Can you see the slides?
Yeah, they're up.
Oh, that's fabulous. Okay then. So, I'm just apologies. Right. So, as you've already said, Chair, we've done a parent-children survey, and that was sent out on the 2nd of November, and I think you touched on the fact that we'd had quite a bit of input from the working group members, and I think that was really good feedback we got, and I think it very much centred around how we got information or how we got feedback from children, and I think we took on board very much the sort of input that we got in terms of how to phrase those questions for children. Obviously, some of the questions, for some of the children, parents and carers will need to help them fill them in. But I think where children are able, it is something they could actually tackle themselves. Something that was really good. Obviously, we started to look at the background documentation, and I think one of the things that was discussed very early on was looking at case studies. And I know that we had a series of case studies that we discussed last week, and I think they were a very good example of how elective home education can work, and also the reasons why parents choose it in the first place. You've referred to the focus group meeting, which is on the 25th, which is next week, and I think we're pleased because we're hoping to try and get some parents there and carers there to share their thoughts with you as members, for you to be able to ask some questions, for them to also feedback what it's like for them and the reasons why they do what they do. And we've got another, you've referred to the fact the next working group is on the 2nd of December. Some of the data that we've been talking about and we've looked at very much was about the trends and around the change that we've seen over the last 4 years. And the chart that's up now, I think, gives a very good example of, you can see, if you look at the total at year end, you can see that from 2016, there has been a steady increase, and then obviously we get to this year and has been a significant increase. Now, bearing in mind that that figure for 2021 is not year end as the others are, that is actually the position in October. So you can see there has been that significant increase that we have seen in parents making that decision to home educate. One of the things we've we've also had running alongside this is that the HMI Ofsted have actually asked us a series of questions in terms of elective home education, so it's obviously on their radar as well. What they did was initially come back and ask us the data in terms of how many students that we had seen who had moved to elective home education since March 2020. So we initially provided them with this information, and we thought this would be useful for yourselves as well. And as you can see at the beginning or the end of March, sorry, we had 403 students in total. That has now moved up to, at the end of October, that's now a total of 536. You can also see that we have been successful in closing some cases. When we say closed cases, that's where children have moved from elective home education back into education, albeit you will notice in July there is, in the end of June, you'll notice there's quite a significant drop, and that's where year 11s, and obviously they are no longer in statutory education. But we thought that was useful as a comparison. Now, we shared that with the DFE, with Ofsted. As normal with Ofsted, when you share some really good quality data, they come back with a series of additional questions, and we thought this was also very useful for you as a panel, but also then we can feed this into the work that working group is doing. They asked about ethnicity, and I think we shared this with them. I think what we took from this was that there is no pattern. If you take out white British, you will see that there is no other significant numbers across all ethnicity. So although it's the data we have, it does show that there is no pattern to it. So it shows that there is nothing behind it. Is there a decision being made around ethnicity? I think we can say that there isn't currently. Some of the other questions they asked about the number of children who have become EHE since April, who are open to social services, and I think we've identified that there were 2 children who are currently on a children in need plan. That total now means that we have 5 children who are currently on a children in need plan who now have elective home education. They asked a question about SEND children, and I think we have 5 children with education healthcare plans. There's 5, and then there's 34 children who are SEND, who are known. But again, there was no obvious pattern to that. They also asked a question around the number of families where all children in the family are now EHE. We did look at our data. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're not in a position where we hold that data in the correct format. But it is something that the team have obviously identified that's something they can go back and look at. They asked us about the number of children where parents have given COVID as a reason for EHE since April, and that's 90. Although I know we've talked in previous meetings about the fact that parents don't always tell us the reasons why, but certainly on those ones who have, it's 90. They asked whether there was any pattern in terms of postcodes and areas, and I know again this is something the working group have already raised with us, and it's data that we've started to interrogate. I think from our point of view at the moment we can't see any pattern, and it would appear that the numbers have increased fairly evenly across all of our towns, and if you drill down across the wards. And then the other thing the HMI asked about whether there was any pattern in terms of schools, or did we see an increase in numbers from one particular school or maybe a group of schools, and again we were able to go back and say there is no pattern. The other thing that we talked, and this is something we talked about in the working group as well, is how we break it down by area or by town. This again is a figure that we've shared with HMI. I think what's important to remember here is a piece of work that we are also doing in the background, which is not just looking at numbers, but it's also looking at a percentage of that town's population in terms of children who are attending school. And that's something that over the next course of the next few weeks, we're hoping that we can go back to the working group and share, because the numbers on their own really are a bit meaningless unless you can see that the percentage against the town as a whole. The reason where it says 9 at the bottom, unknown, we do know the children, we do know their postal addresses. Unfortunately, we're in the process of swapping over from Capita to Synergy for pupil data management, and there are still some tweaks with postal codes. So as you know, many of our postal codes we share with other authorities, and it's just matching those 9 children into the right towns. Breakdown, since April we've had 165 children, primary children, and 87 secondary children, and that's it from us. I think it's we wanted to give you a flavour for sort of work that we started to look at and how we're interrogating the data that we do have.
Thank you for that, Sue. That was helpful. Do any members have any questions or comments on the working group as it is at the moment, or the future work that's planned? I know that again, this is mainly for the benefit of those members who aren't members of the working group, to keep you apprised of what's going on. Councillor Underhill wants to come in. Councillor Underhill.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank actually the working group and officers for the amount of work that's actually gone into this since I first put in my request for scrutiny to actually look at home education, because from briefings I could see that it was gradually going up year on year, and we needed to look at it. And really, there's no comments on what's actually been done, just the fact that I'm sure at the end of it we'll come away with a hell of a lot more information than we knew at the beginning, which will help us to actually plan for the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Underhill. That's so your comments are gratefully received, I think, by myself and everyone on the working group, and also the officers. I think we've got off to a good start on this piece of work. We just have to keep up the momentum going through the next couple of months. Any other questions or comments on this before we move on to the final item? No? Okay. Well, thank you, Sue and Ramsey, for that. That was very helpful. We will meet as a full working group again on the 2nd of December, and of course we've got that focus group next week for the members and the parents and the teachers. Okay. The final part of the business item of the agenda was just what I inserted at the start of the meeting there, where I wanted to just give a very brief outline of the outcomes for this board from the joint session we held with the Health and Adult Social Care Committee a couple of weeks ago. We took away two pieces of work to hear again at some point in the future, which is a report on acute paediatric children's beds, and a detailed report from partners on the CAMS service. Those reports will be heard in the new year, likely to be around February, March time, or slightly later, as the reports will be largely produced by colleagues working in the NHS. We do want to keep an eye on their capacity, especially over the winter with the COVID surge as it is. So we won't be demanding that we consider those reports until the operational pressures on them have eased a little bit. But that was all I wanted to say to members, to say that I'll be making a decision in the next few weeks and months around fitting those 2 agenda items in to our meetings in the new year for us to consider. Does anyone have any comments at all on the joint committee session, or any feedback from members on that session? I'm not seeing any hands going up, so no. Okay, that's great. And then finally, our next meeting will be on the 11th of January. So I will hopefully see you all then. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, stay safe, all the usual messages, and thank you for your attendance this evening. This meeting is closed.
Thank you, Liam.
Thank you, Liam. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.